Good afternoon. Greetings, everybody. Great you could be with us. We'll just kick it off in another 30 seconds or so, and we're delighted that you could join us. Just stand by, please. Good afternoon, good morning, greetings wherever you are across North America. And in fact, we've got some registrations from outside North America. Welcome, greetings. It's great you could be with us for another one of our State of the American Traveller research webinars. We've been doing these for quite a number of years. In fact, Miles has been working with our very good friends and colleagues at Destination Analysts for over a decade. And this particular edition we call the Traveller Segments Edition. And we've got 3 Traveller segments to dive into today. But let me introduce the wonderful panelists we've got. A very old and familiar face to many of you, Dave Braddon, a very good friend, founder at Destination Analysts, and really the architect of a lot of the information he's going to be sharing today around the Traveller Segments Edition. Dave, you're joining us from San Francisco, mate?
Yes, I am. Good to be with you, Chris.
And another hopefully familiar face to many of you and a very good friend to the tourism industry, Donnie Ledbetter, is Tourism Program Manager at the National Park Service and a real enthusiast and champion for the tourism industry inside the National Park Service. Donnie, you're joining us from the DC area?
That's right, Chris, here in Washington, D.C., Park Service headquarters, but, you know, from my apartment for the time being.
Very good. Well, we're so pleased that you could both be with us to dive into the rich information. So I just want to highlight that the slides, a recording of the presentation, and a range of other resources that both Dave, Donnie, and the Miles team have pulled together will be available up on that milespartnership.com/SAT, State of the American Traveller site. There's also information around the State of the American Traveller on Destination Analyst site. And if you haven't had a look, please interact with their dashboard that the Destination Analyst team pulled together. And we launched a couple of webinars ago. Allows you to query and interact with the data in a far more sort of engaging way. So the agenda for today, Dave's going to kick it off with the latest sentiment, how Americans feeling as we approach the end of summer in the United States, the rise of the Delta variant. Of course, things are moving very rapidly in that area. We're going to look at these 3 Traveller segments in some detail, and there's actually going to be a separate slide deck we'll be sharing with you as a deliverable out of this webinar. So we'll be looking at national park travellers, outdoor enthusiasts, and that's people who are passionate about a range of outdoor activities. What are their unique characteristics, behaviours, interests, and media use, for example. And what we're calling likely international travelers. Obviously, Americans, about a third of Americans typically went overseas every year. They can't do that anywhere near the same number. So what are their interests, and is there an opportunity to convert them to a domestic vacation? I'm going to be doing an interview with Donnie about what the National Park Service is doing. They've got some very substantive new funding and some exciting works and programs underway there. So there's some really critical sort of updates about how your destination, your tourism business might be able to engage in new and fresh ways with the National Park Service. And then we'll share a couple of final resources. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Dave, and we'll be back with you at the end of his presentation for the interview with Donnie. So please take it away, Dave.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for being here with us today. I'm always excited for this webinar. You know how many webinars we've been doing, but doing this with Chris every quarter is always a treat. excuse me, we're going to be talking about the State of the American Traveler, which is a survey that Miles and my company, Destination Analysts, have been doing for a long, long time, since 2006. And the data I'll present to you today comes from mid-July, a nationally representative sample of 2,000 American leisure travelers. And we picked 3 different segments that we're going to talk about today: national parks, outdoor enthusiasts, and likely international travelers. And I wanted to start, though, with a little bit of national data for travelers in general. And we'll talk about optimism and expectations, which are really quite high now, kind of surprisingly in a pandemic, but it's good news. And what you're going to see is that each of these 3 segments is quite a bit higher in terms of its optimism and expectations for the coming year. So they're good segments to be thinking about, no matter who you are, whether you're a city or a rural destination. And I'll make that argument in a minute. So let's talk about current traveler sentiment. We ask a question, and we've been doing so since the beginning, on what you expect to do in the next 12 months compared to the previous 12 months in terms of the number of trips you take. And right now, 56% of Americans expect to travel more in the next year than they did in the last year. Now, that's a big number. But remember, first of all, that this is compared to the pandemic year that was just previous. So we'd be really surprised if this weren't high, obviously, but it's up a bit from April. And let's look at it over time. If you look at it here, you can see that up until the point of the pandemic, we've been fairly stable with about 40%, 38 to 40% of travelers saying they were going to travel more in a typical year. But then things went haywire. I saw this and I thought this reminded me of what Chris Adams's EKG probably looks like when his beloved All Blacks lose a rugby game after the pandemic. Anyway, everything moved around like crazy, but I want to point out the percent that expect to travel more. You can see it dropped sharply when the pandemic started, but it's been growing and growing. But we're way above where we've ever been historically for this metric. In terms of how many trips people are taking, you can see that here again with the pandemic that's beginning being marked. We were at a high point right before of 4.8 trips. And that too had been relatively stable over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. But you can see it dropped and is held on a little over 3 trips a year, but we're up a bit from the summer wave, which is good news. How much in maximum are people willing to spend for travel? Well, right now, the average is $4,250 for the year. That includes a lot of people that are over 4,000, as you can see, and unfortunately, quite a few that are under 500. So we have some variety there in the middle, but this is way up from April, and let's look at it over time. You can see that prior to the pandemic, we had an average of about 3,500 a year for the typical American traveler over the period, but that's gone way up. And you can see right now we're at a record high of 4,250. So travelers by and large are feeling good financially. And let me show you some more data on that as we go. How will leisure travel fit in as a spending priority in the upcoming year? Well, 63.7% now say that it will be something of a priority, from somewhat high priority to an extremely high priority, up from 57% in April. Only 9% see leisure travel as a non-priority item this year. And let's look at how that's changed over time. Again, you can see when the pandemic began, we were at a really record high level in terms of the proportion that were high prioritizing leisure travel. That dropped, but has been going up and up and up to 63.7 now. So we're heading in the right direction on that metric for sure. Financial confidence of travelers. Well, right now, would you say you're better off or worse off than you were a year ago? 32.8% say they're better off, only 14 worse off. Where are you going to be a year from now? 42.8%, much better off, only 8% worse off. So there's a lot of good feeling about the future financially, which flows over into this final question. Is it a good time basically to spend money on leisure travel? 44.3% say yeah, compared to only 17.5% that say no. So overall, we see a traveling public that has high expectations for travel in the upcoming year compared to the year before. Leisure travel numbers are improving, although they're still below the historical average. The importance of leisure travel, sorry about the typo, I don't know how spell check didn't get that, has improved and it's really high right now. And finally, the financial situation of Americans traveling households seems very solid with good expectations for the future. So keep that in mind as we go through these three segments, because you're going to see that they're even stronger than the national averages I just showed you. So let's talk about national parks travelers. These travelers account for 33% of the American traveling public. 1 out of 3 American travelers went to a national park or monument in the past year. They tend to be younger. You can see the generations broken out here. The blue are national parks travelers, and the green are anyone else, people who didn't go to a national park but traveled for leisure. And you'll see that blue-green thing throughout this presentation, just so you'll know what we're up to. So let's look at the younger generations. You can see that each one of them is considerably higher than the other travelers. In average, the typical national parks traveler is 45 years compared to 52 years of age for other travelers. Now, one thing to keep in mind, 45 isn't exactly a spring chicken, right? I'm not saying they're all super young people, because you can see the biggest generation are Gen X, which is a generation that's matured towards the Middle Ages now. Okay, under comparison, they skew a little bit male, and they skew heavily towards traveling with children. You can see that 52% of national parks travelers travel with their kids. Only 32% of other travelers do so. The number of leisure trips they take in the past 12 months is a big difference too. 4.5 for the parks travelers, 3.3 for other travelers. So they're out on the road more than what we see in the other traveling public. They're ready to travel and spend, like I said before. 60.7% expect to travel more for leisure this year than they did the year before. Only 54% of the others feel that way. Remember, the national average was 56 from that earlier data. We ask about the priority of spending again, like we showed you earlier. 47% of national parks travelers say it's an extremely high priority or high priority in the next 12 months, compared to only 29 for other travelers. Looking forward, do you feel that the 6 months from now, your family income will have risen? Well, 48% of those who visited parks say, yep, my income's going to go up. Only 30% of others. And is it a good time to spend on travel? Well, yeah, 51 to 38%, 39% here. So we see, before I go on, sorry. Oops, there we are. We see that this is a group of people that are ready to travel, and compared to the national public, which is already feeling good about travel, they're much better. And you're going to see that in the other segments too. So we ask a question about what people are into. What are you passionate about? From I'm totally passionate about this to I have no interest in it on a scale. And we give them a list of different things. And you can see the top 20 here for national park travelers. And the number one thing that they're interested in is food and cuisine, but followed by international travel. This is a group that likes to go abroad as well. And let me just show you how these passions play out in terms of actual travel behavior. We asked about whether you traveled outside the United States in the past 12 months. Park travelers, 23, other travelers, 8%. So much higher, more than double the likelihood to have gone outside the country, even during a pandemic. In the next 12 months, you can see that almost 50% of parks travelers say they're likely or very likely to travel abroad, much lower for other travelers. So what we're passionate about, we end up doing in the marketplace. Another thing they're passionate about, enjoying theme parks and amusement parks, interestingly. Let's look at that. You can see 48% of parks travelers said they've gone to a theme park in the last year, only 18% of other travelers. So that list of passions I shared with you are a good place to go to think about what, how I'm going to message to these people in terms of what they really are into in life. Let's talk about their destination preferences, and they're varied. And one of the things I want you to take away from this presentation is that because you're an outdoors person doesn't mean you don't like cities too. We ask, I do not like spending time in vacations in cities. 40% agree with that. But when we ask, I generally prefer visiting large cities to rural travel experiences like national parks. Another 40.6% say, yeah, I prefer cities in that, given that trade-off. So we have a group of people that are into cities too, and they're into the nature, and it's not just one or the other for sure. What they're looking for in travel, the top things that they want out of their trips are being memorable, fun, and relaxing. The thing about this is everybody wants a memorable, fun, relaxing trip, right? Let's look at the absolute difference between park travelers and other travelers. And you can see that if you go down to the bottom here with the lower differences, memorability, relaxing, and fun are small. So relative to the other group, they're not that different. Everybody kind of wants that. But where they're really different are the desire to be close to nature and find a place with the trim for transformative change or life-changing experiences. And then a little bit below it, but still big difference here, luxury, upscale experiences, place for romance, culture, high-class, family-friendly experiences. So again, think about this weaving the type of traveler that's not only into nature, but they're also into the kind of fun things we can experience in our great urban destinations. So national parks represent about 1/3 of the traveling public. Younger male persons with kids, they tend to be. They take more leisure trips than their counterparts and are extremely optimistic about the next 12 months. National parks travelers are typically doing well financially right now with high expectations for the upcoming year. And beyond parks experiences, they tend to be into food and cuisine, theme parks, and musical concerts. Urban travel experiences are also popular with many national parks visitors. Okay, so let's talk about outdoor enthusiasts. And what we're going to see is that these people are very similar to parks travelers, but a little bit more intense in terms of their plans for the future. And how are we going to define them? Well, in our passions question, we asked about a wide variety of different things. And so we picked out the ones that were outdoor recreation oriented, from mountain biking to hunting, to hiking, to camping, to canoeing, fishing, skiing, bird watching, and took those. And if you said that you were passionate about it, we're going to call any one of them, we're going to call you a outdoor enthusiast. So these are what the numbers look like. 11.8% of American travelers say they're passionate about camping. 10.7% day hiking, down to bird hunting at 3%. So you know, people can be in many of these. Like I'm into camping, I would say, and definitely into hiking, both of those hiking categories. So 3 of them I would check off. If we look at that in total, we'd see that 35.2% of travelers are passionate about at least one of these outdoor activities. So let's call those your outdoor enthusiasts, okay? So 49% of them, by the way, visited a national park in the last year. So again, here's that overlap I talked about. They're part of them are the parks people. So they also tend to be younger. We see that 44 is an average age compared to 53 for other travelers. They're more excited about traveling in the upcoming year, more likely to say they're going to be traveling more, as you can see here. The priorities for spending in leisure travel question we talked about, 48% to 28.6. So again, more enthusiastic about that. Looking forward, do you feel that 6 months from now, your family income will have risen? 51.5% of outdoor enthusiasts say, yep, I'm going to be making more money in 6 months, compared to 28 for the other group. And thinking if now is a good time to travel or a bad time, again, 53.3 to 39.5. So there's much more, you know, excited about travel, much more confident about their finances. So let's talk about urban experiences. And Donnie is going to show some really great examples of some ads in a bit. And they really moved me when I saw them, because I think it's going to show you that cities and urban places really have an opportunity to work with the national parks, to work with state parks, whatever, to create experiences that cater to these people who both love urban places and love the outdoors too. So let's just look at this agreement scale question. Experiencing nature away from urban areas is usually an important part of my leisure travel. 74% of this group said yeah. Only 10% disagreed with that. So they're definitely wanting experiences away from an urban area where they can experience nature. I do not like spending my vacation time in cities. 45% said yes, but 32% disagree with that statement. They like spending time in cities. That's me, right? I love nature, but I also like going to New York City and hanging out. I prefer visiting large cities, though, to rural travel experiences. 37% say that. So there's this segment of outdoor recreation, outdoor enthusiasts who definitely prefer cities, even though they're into these activities. So there's this thing going on, as you can see, hopefully, that they're not separate. You know, if you're an outdoor enthusiast, it doesn't mean that you're not into, you know, going to Vegas and having a good time. Okay, what are they into beyond outdoor activities? Let's look at our passions question again. Here again are the top 20 for outdoor enthusiasts. We can see food and cuisine, and then a couple outdoorsy things, international travel, fishing, and then enjoying theme parks, musical concerts, and so on. And as I said before, I'm not going to share the data with you, but the fact that they're indicating it in this question, if we looked at their actual travel behaviors, they're out there doing these things at a high level. They're into fun, memorable, and relaxing experiences. Remember, we said those are the three things everybody's into, but there's something kind of fun and interesting about this group when we look at their absolute difference between other travelers. Number one is fun. So this group of people want to have a good time, followed by cuisine, and then memorable, close to nature, and relaxing in terms of where they are different from the normal traveling public. So takeaways for this group: outdoor enthusiasts represent 35% of the traveling public. About half of them also visit our national parks. They tend to be younger, with a mean age of 44 compared to a mean age of 53 for other travelers. Travel spending this year will be a high priority for outdoor enthusiasts. Their financial situations are largely solid, with high expectations for their pocketbooks in the coming year. And while experiencing nature away from large cities is typically an important part of their travel, many prefer urban travel destinations to rural ones. So I understand, guys, too, I'm moving pretty quickly through this data. It's all available to you, so don't worry about that. I saw somebody had just asked about it. And these two segments are really important, I think, that we talk about, because one of the things we've been noticing as we've been tracking this coronavirus pandemic over the past year and a half is that we've seen a real strong shift away from desire to be in urban areas to more rural and parksy related stuff in travel. You know, we always used to call the urban vacation, you know, the king of leisure travel in America, because more people took urban trips, and they took more numbers of them by far than they did for other rural types of destinations. But that's flip-flopped during the pandemic. And we've also seen something in our surveys and in our qualitative research, our interviews and focus groups, that I think is important too, that a lot of people who maybe they weren't experienced in the outdoors before the pandemic have had that experience now. Maybe they went camping and had a great time, or they went out and did some bird watching with grandpa and loved it, you know, and now that's kind of been introduced into their world. So there's definitely an opportunity there for destinations that sell these types of experiences to take advantage of this ground that's been laid and the positivity amongst travelers around it. Okay. So let's shift to likely international travelers. And these are people who said that they're likely or very likely to go outside the US in the next 12 months. Pretty simple segmentation here, but if you think you're going to go abroad, what do you look like? Who are you? And the first thing we notice is that they have very high expectations to take more trips this year. 75% say that they're likely to take more trips this year than last. So this is the highest of the three we've seen. In fact, one of the highest we could find in all the different segments that we've looked at. Would you say that you and your household are better off or worse financially? 53 to 22 compared to other travelers, those that are not likely to travel abroad. Looking forward, you feel a year from now, your family will be better off financially, 56.7 to 25.6. So again, very sound footing here in terms of where they feel they are financially. And then is it a good time to spend your money on travel? Well, 65% of likely international travelers said, yep, it's a good time or a very good time to spend money on leisure travel. More than basically double the other travelers here. So definitely a group of people that are feeling their oats financially and feeling good about spending on leisure travel. And it's shown in these next two data big time. The priority question we've seen, think about the next 12 months, where will leisure travel be as a priority? Way higher for likely international travelers and others. And when we ask about how much their maximum budget will be, this will blow you away, $6,244 compared to $3,190 for the other group. So they're planning to spend a lot more money this year than their non-international likely counterparts. But the interesting thing, when we move beyond that, is they aren't taking any more trips than other travelers. Both had the exact same mean number of trips in the past year, 3.68 trips. So while they may not be traveling as much, they're excited to change that. And they certainly are going to put their money where their mouth is if our survey is predictive at all. Okay, this questionnaire this time is, we do a lot of questions designed to understand the psychographics of different people. And when we looked at international travelers, one thing really jumped out, and that is that they're much more likely to be what we call an authenticity seeker. So they're looking for the real deal. And I'm just going to show you 4 questions to kind of back that up here. We gave them an agreement scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And you see the percent that agree to some level with this statement. I put effort into finding experiences that are unique to, can only be found in my destination. Okay, so they want to find stuff that's unique to the place they're going to. Hate commercial or touristy destinations and attractions, considerably more likely to feel that way than other traveling people. How important is, this was an important scale from extremely important to extremely unimportant in general. Experiencing the lifestyle of people living in my destination, way more likely than other travelers to say, yeah, I want to go somewhere and I want to experience the lifestyle of those people. And finally, prioritizing learning as much as possible about the customs, traditions, and history of my destination. And this was a question that was framed basically, how likely are you to do this when you travel? And they're much more likely to want to learn about customs and traditions and history of the places they go to. So when you're thinking about if you're an international destination trying to draw Americans or service them, a business servicing them in some way, understand that they're very heavily into this authenticity thing. They're also younger, as you can see here, like we showed before, the Gen X, Millennial, and Gen Z groups comprise a bigger share, 69 to 54.9%. And interestingly, they're more likely to be in the West or Northeast or Southwest. This shows the percent of all travelers that are in each region that we identify as likely international travelers. The least likely area of the country is the Midwest. Still, almost 30% of Midwesterners are saying they're likely to go abroad this year. Let's talk about their passions real quick. International travel, no surprise, was their top passion. You can see here that the vast majority of them either consider it a passion or of high interest to them. Food and cuisine, wine, and musical concerts, pop and rock are the top things that they say they're passionate about as travelers. And then down below, hiking, enjoying theme parks, art museums, theater plays, musical concerts, classical and symphony, all performing very well here. So they have a wider range of cultural interests that you can see in that particular profile. And what are they into? Well, memorable, fun, and relaxing. No surprise, we saw that on all the others. That's what people want. But following that, we have great culinary food options, sunny, warm climate, and affordability, and unique, unlike other places. So let's go through our takeaways and we'll be done. About 1/3 of American leisure travelers say they are likely to travel abroad in the next 12 months. The group has extremely high expectations for travel in the upcoming year and appear to be in a quite sound financial situation. They are authenticity seekers to the max. And finally, in addition to international travel, these travelers tend to be passionate about food and wine and musical concerts. So hopefully this will give you some background to think about these groups as you market to them this year. And if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to field them. If you need additional data or a little bit deeper dive, just reach out to me and I'm happy to do that for you. Okay, it's all yours, Chris. think you're muted, Chris.
Chris, we're not hearing you.
Yeah, I can't hear you, Chris. Sorry, guys, we'll get this fixed in a minute.
No.
Can't hear anything, Chris, if you're talking. Nope, nope, nope. I'm guessing Chris is going to come back in a minute, everyone. So look at the QA, see if we have any questions we can answer. Yeah, Carrie Lambert, the most recent survey was done in July of this year. So the data I present is about a month old. Was the national park traveler, other traveler age gap related to pandemic travel, hesitancy by older, more risk averse? Would it be? Yeah, from anonymous. Yeah, I think that's probably the case. Donnie and I were talking about that earlier, that this profile is a little different than what you historically see in the parks. And yeah, I wouldn't surprise me at all. We saw much higher travel proclivities and excitement from the youth throughout this thing than we've seen from older people.
Yeah.
And the data set, again, another question was, it's a nationally representative sample of 2,000 American adult travelers. So, okay.
You know, and while we're waiting, Dave, I'll just make a quick observation. You know, you had highlighted the desire for unique experiences among some of those demographics that you were profiling. And I always love when I'm talking with my travel and tourism colleagues to give a shout out to the width and breadth of the national park system. You know, when we talk about national parks, a lot of the big marquee parks get a lot of the attention. You know, I always love to encourage my destination management colleagues, folks who are out there in the DMO world, to think about that larger portfolio that is the national park system, 423 units. And then beyond that, we've got affiliated sites. We've got national trails, national scenic byways, national heritage areas, national historic trails, national landmarks, the Register of Historic Places. There's such a huge portfolio of these kinds of sites that are unique by their very nature. So just a quick shout out, you know, whenever I see that finding, I always think of that big portfolio of designated sites we have in the national park system and affiliated sites that can be, you know, kind of incorporated into destination strategies.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt, huh? You back with us, Chris?
Oh,
no, I guess not.
You know, if need be, you know, I've got the slide deck and could share and, you know, could go through some of the observations I brought to the presentation today.
Yeah, why don't we just go ahead and do that? Yeah, I'm sure
okay.
Chris will get back with us in a minute.
Yeah, thanks for bearing with us, folks. And again, I'm Donnie Ledbetter. I'm going to share my screen here in just a second. I'm the Tourism Program Manager for the National Park Service. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today, to be with Dave and Chris and share some observations from the National Park System and speak with all of you in the DMO world. Really appreciate the partnerships that we have between the Park Service and the travel and tourism sector, and those relationships that you all have with your local national park units, you know, and other public lands and waters. So thank you so much for the chance to speak today. Let me just ask Dave, is that screen sharing successfully?
Yep, looks good, Donnie.
Okay, well, why don't I just dive in and get going here? One of the items that Chris wanted me to talk about was how visitation is looking at the national park system right now and how it's been for us over the last year and a half plus, and then what it might look like for the next 6 months or so, you know, over that kind of winter time period. So, well, you know, like all destinations, visitation to the national park system last year was incredibly down, was down significantly, of course, to the system overall. And oh, the numbers got a little small here on this slide. Apologies for that. But you can see we had a big 28% decline in visitation to the overall system last year. You have to go back to 1980 before you get visitation that was any lower than it was last year to the overall system. So obviously a big hit. And if you have parks in your destination, you're familiar with that. What's unique though and remarkable is that even within that context, there were about 15 units in the system that saw record visitation. And I listed a couple of them here, some of them near to urban areas, because as we all saw, a real switch to that close to home recreation, close to home travel. That was the, you know, a lot of people's preferences last year. And I think we saw that in some of our parks that are close to urban areas. So we even saw some record visitation last year to some units. But let's look even more granularly at the visitation trends last year at different types of units. And I think this is important for your different destinations. Basically what you're looking at here, and oh, apologies again, the numbers got a little bit small on the graph, but that's okay. The story here is we're looking at month to month last year, how down or up visitation was to these different types of units compared to 2019. So the story you want to take away from this slide is how visitation to places like national lake shores, seashores, recreation areas, national monuments, there are big ones like Dinosaur National Monument, Colorado National Monument, and to national parks recovered a lot faster than other types of units like our national historic sites, our national historical parks, our national memorials. Those kinds of park units, you know, think historic houses, museums, historic homes, kind of indoor units that are part of the national park system, a much slower recovery. No surprise, really, but it's interesting to see it pulled out here and segmented across the different type of park designations and really see just how true that was. And Chris is back, so let's check his audio and see how he's doing.
Thanks, Donnie. You guys are obviously true pros, so thank you for jumping in. My computer just completely crashed, so thank you so much for picking up the breach. I take it, Dave, you're advancing the slides, are you?
I'm sharing right now.
Oh, yeah. That's good. Okay, well, why don't you finish your thought and then I can jump in with the additional questions that we were going to chat about.
Sounds good. Absolutely. Well, so we're looking at those different national park segments and see how the visitation trends, you know, recover differently to those different types of park units. So what's that mean this year, though, in 2021? Well, that trend has just kind of continued over 2021. And the red arrow in the background is telling you that visitation to a number of park units this year has actually been has been very, very high, very, very strong, and even breaking records at multiple park units across the system. Your Yellowstones, your Grand Tetons, but even around the Great Lakes, your Outer Banks, parks in Utah, all of these places, and you've seen the headlines, and maybe it's happening in your destination, are actually experiencing record visitation this year. Now, overall, for the entire park system, remember 423 units, we're still not on track to exceed or match visitation in 2019 overall. So we've got a slower, you know, kind of recovery to those levels as well. But within that, you're definitely seeing that big preference for outdoor recreation, outdoor activities, road trips, definitely being seen in these high visitation numbers to these types of park units. And of course, you see more airlift to places like Bozeman and Denver, that sort of gateway community that's, you know, bringing people to a lot of these parks in the Rocky Mountain area. So for the 6 months ahead, you know, I think these trends will remain strong. Obviously, the Delta and other variants, you know, are what's driving, you know, all the statistics that we're seeing. But I think that parks with outdoor activities that are accessible in the fall and winter will likely be popular. Think maybe your southern parts of the country. You know, the winter is a great time to visit southern Florida, great parks down there in southern Florida. I think those will be popular over the next 6 months. Parks with indoor activities probably lagging a little bit, your historic homes and your historic sites. But we are seeing visitation increase there as well as we're getting vaccines, you know, out there across the population. We have different health and safety protocols in place for these sites too. So we certainly are seeing visitation return to those as well, but a little slower than maybe your big landscape parks.
So thanks so much, Donnie, for those insights. Thinking about destinations that are working with the National Park Service, both pre-COVID, but particularly, you know, into COVID, what are some standout examples you wanted to highlight of how destinations are working with the National Park Service and highlighting their national parks and monuments in unique ways?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that question. You know, a lot of destination organizations work closely with the parks in their destination portfolio to align messaging, to coordinate publicity or marketing, you know, to be on the same page. And we really appreciate that. I always encourage any CVB and DMO, you know, strengthen those relationships with those park units, with the staff there, you know, get on board with the messaging and the collaboration. You know, a lot of park service, you know, professionals aren't necessarily tourism professionals, don't know, you know, necessarily have a a background in CVBs or DMOs and that kind of thing. I think they're eager for those relationships to happen. And they definitely do out there across the system. And we appreciate that. And we've seen that over the last year as a lot of destinations have, of course, pivoted to highlight their outdoor opportunities, their outdoor landscapes, their recreation opportunities. So many of you all in the audience, pivoting in that way over the last year. One wonderful example that I know about was in Southern Florida, in fact, with Miami launching this Miami Land campaign, which the video certainly caught my attention. I don't think there's a single building in the entire video, which is a dramatic shift from, maybe that typical Miami, a brand positioning. It was all outdoor activities, all wonderful Southern Florida landscapes, which I love. I love the parks down there. I can't encourage you to visit them enough. I know that the CVB worked with my park colleagues. They worked to get together about what it would include, what some of the video and B-roll and images would be, what some of the messages would be. We love the chance to remind people to travel responsibly, recreate responsibly, leave no trace, those sort of sustainability and stewardship messages. So that was a great example of some colleagues working together. And I just want to observe that my colleagues at that park, a couple of them have attended IPW in the past as part of our presence at that show. That really ramped up their understanding of a need to cultivate a close relationship with their DMO partners. And that's just a great example of where that really is happening. And I love it when I see that happen. So a couple good examples out there, but Miami and the parks of Southern Florida, Everglades, Biscayne, Big Cypress, really good example from recently.
Yeah, very good. And a shout out to Rolando and the whole team at the Greater Miami CVB. And, really fun campaign that sort of played on the theme park experience of Florida, but presented a completely different sort of view of what a theme park could be. Of course, the greatest theme park on earth, the great outdoors. So any sort of key messaging around health and safety, Donnie, that you'd want to just highlight, given, the rise of Delta, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. And, like all of us, not public health experts, I always want to defer, right to the definitive resource. And I want to highlight the fact that at our website, which is nps.gov, and every park has its own web pages, at our main website, there's a banner at the top of every single page that leads you to our latest public health information. So if you've got questions about the current status at your particular parks in your portfolio, your destination, I encourage you to go there for the latest, most definitive information. Generally speaking, we have been very, very cautious. We are a federal agency. We're part of that larger federal response to the pandemic. We take our cues from the CDC and from our public health, experts within the federal government. At the moment, we do have a mask requirement inside buildings and inside structures on federal lands in national parks. So that requirement is there. And even outside, some people think maybe that's a little weird, but if you've been to a national park, you've got trails, overlooks, you've got all sorts of outdoor situations where you're actually in pretty close proximity to strangers, for who knows how long, right? And so we want to be extra cautious, we want to be really careful in those scenarios. So that is the stance right now as far as mask requirements. But again, we've got all that latest up-to-date information on the park website.
Yeah, very good. Another topical issue over the last, couple of years, even obviously pre-COVID and then into COVID, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know the National Park Service has been active in this area of trying to reach out to underserved communities. So a couple of programs you'd like to highlight in that whole DEI area.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to give a quick shout out too to the fact that the American story is never done being told. We're always needing to acknowledge and recognize and incorporate and interpret the continuing understanding of the American story and our history. So I say that to acknowledge that new sites are always being added to the national park system. A great site is actually in Chicago, Pullman National Monument, having its grand opening this upcoming weekend. Pullman, it was an African-American, the first African-American workers union, the Pullman Porters on those train cars in the late 1800s, the headquarters of Pullman there in Chicago, now part of the national park system. So we're continuously expanding that system, telling new stories, incorporating more points of view. So that's an important part. Everyone needs to see themselves reflected in America's greatest idea. If it's going to be America's best idea, it needs to incorporate, that full panoply of histories and stories and perspectives. And sometimes those are hard stories, and we always have to continue, interrogating those and telling those in new ways. So I have to shout that out because that's such an important part of how we do, exactly address this topic. Some other programs, though, that facilitate visitation of the park system. I want to shout out this Every Kid Outdoors program that we have. You know, for some demographics, even the entrance fees to national parks and other public lands might be a barrier to visitation. You know, not overly expensive, I think, for most travelers and tourists, but $35, $25, other fees, they can add up. And so we want to reduce any friction or barriers that we can for visiting national parks. And we have this program where every fourth grader in the United States, every fourth grader can earn by completing a little activity book, a little activity online or in their classroom, because teachers can get these as a package, an activity for their classroom. Every fourth grader is eligible to earn their park pass, and it gives them admission to every national park unit and their families, you know, a carload of people for a year. And it also covers other public lands where there might be fees, national forests, national refuges, you know, Bureau of Reclamation, you know, recreation areas and that sort of thing. So this is a great program that, you know, heck, a DMO could, you know, amplify this a little bit, you know, when they're doing their promotion to families, family travelers and those segments. You've got a fourth grader. Whoa, do you know about this program? They can get their free park pass. They love the ownership, you know, of having their own pass, get their family into the park for free. That pass is good for a year. So Every Kid Outdoors, Google it, you know, it comes right up. Great program that we continue. It launched during the Park Services Centennial and has continued to get funding for us to be able to do that, which is really great. I also want to shout out our investments in accessibility. And so this is something I'm definitely passionate about. I want to shout out all the people like the Travelability Seminar and the different folks that are doing work in the accessibility space, because, you know, travelers, disabled travelers with different accessibility needs, they're just travelers like us. You know, they want to travel, they want to get out there and see, you know, all of this great country has to offer, including the national park system. And we take that really seriously at the agency. Not only are we investing continuously significant funds into the kind of infrastructure, interpretive signage, trails, you know, different visitor experiences in the parks themselves that make them more and more and more accessible. We're also investing online so the digital information about that is easy to find. We know that's a challenging part for people traveling with accessibility needs, to find the information they need to know they're going to be able to have that experience. Every park unit under its Plan Your Trip section has accessibility information, some more detailed than others, depends on, you know, who's sitting there, you know, at the computer putting the info in. But it's been a big push of ours recently to really get that information robust online at the website. We also have a separate accessibility section of the webpage as well with more information. So a lot happening both in the physical infrastructure and the digital information. And I have to shout out that we have an accessibility pass. If there's some criteria you have to meet, some paperwork you have to fill out. If you are a disabled American, you're eligible for an America the Beautiful Access Pass. This covers your entrance to national parks, other public lands and waters for life. This is an access pass for life for travelers, you know, with that meet that certain criteria. So we encourage folks to check that out as well, and appreciate the chance to raise awareness of it.
Thank you so much, Donnie. So anything else you want to highlight as we wrap up the sort of review of the National Park Service? The last and most important thing I think we wanted to cover was the additional funding that came through over the last couple of years. Corey Gardner was the at the forefront of that bill that gave very substantive funding to the National Park Service. Can you speak a little bit about that, and where is that funding going?
Yeah, let me give a quick profile shot here of the Great American Outdoors Act and draw folks' attention to a website where it's very publicly available, the list of projects that are being invested in or under consideration for these funds. So quick background, you know, this is some funds that have been allocated to the National Park Service. It's from royalties, actually from energy production in the United States portfolio of energy production. Royalties being allocated to the National Park Service to invest in infrastructure. You know, this is your very tangible trails and roads and buildings and utilities and the very practical stuff that makes that high quality visitor experience possible. And certainly it's no secret that a lot of the national park system, we've struggled in recent years to keep up with that infrastructure maintenance backlog. You know, it's a big system that's existed for many decades now, had a big investment in it about 50 years ago where a lot of this infrastructure came from. We need a lot of renewal. And so this is a great shot in the arm for the national park system tourism, up to $6.5 billion total over that 5 years. We're in about year 2 of it right now. And these are some examples, you know, I just cut and paste here: road rehabilitation, scenic loop repairs, transmission lines. Here in the photo, you see one of the tour bus staging areas at the Grand Canyon. You know, you can take that train up into the Grand Canyon, and then, you know, there's tour buses that take people around, that sort of thing. So it's this kind of practical stuff. You're really going to be seeing the results of this in the parks over the next couple of years, and heck, for decades to come. So a very welcome shot of investment in our America's Best idea.
Yeah, and so almost certainly in your region, your state, your city, there's likely to be something new, something refurbished, something that's being rebuilt that you can also highlight. So thank you so much. Donnie, if you could just advance the slides further.
Absolutely. Yeah. Quick stop on my email address. If anyone would like to reach out to me, Donald_Ledbetter, NPS.gov. And please do. Love to hear from my colleagues in the travel and tourism sector.
Very good. And I'll just get you to advance through the final slides, and then we'll come to a few questions that we received, and we'll just use the final minutes on those. So just a reminder about the resources from today, the slide deck, the recording. We'll break out those individual slide decks from Dave's presentation for each of the 3 segments. So take advantage of accessing those, and also the online Insights dashboard. Just a couple of other resources I wanted to highlight for you today. As you can see on the next slide here, please access our, we're calling it now Clarity in a Time of Change Resource Center. So that's got ongoing research resources and other information around how destinations, businesses are grappling with the COVID crisis. And a couple of key projects I'll highlight just on the next couple of slides, Donnie. So just in the theme of DEI, Donnie gave a shout out to Travelability Conference, Jake Steinman's event that was just held recently over the last few days in Tampa. Miles, along with a variety of other companies and agencies, including Visit Florida, were sponsors of that. And we released, with our very good friends at Destination Analysts, and Dave and his team worked on this, a look at disability travel and the unique characteristics and the significant opportunity of American travelers with disabilities. So at that website, you can actually pick up that research and a range of other resources on the whole opportunity around American travelers with disabilities. They represent about 20% of American travelers either have a disability themselves or have traveled in the last couple of years with someone with a disability, so a significant segment. I also wanted to highlight on this next slide, we are with, again, our good friends at Destination Analysts, Civitas and Tourism Economics. We're updating the funding futures. This is a comprehensive look at tourism taxation and funding options and opportunities for DMOs. It's going to be presented at the Destinations International Advocacy Summit and the Funding Forum on October the 26th. So, and we're going to have a special look at the opportunity around regenerative tourism funding. And then just finally, I wanted to highlight the resources you can see here from Global All-Stars 2021. So at the annual convention of Destinations International, we had speakers from around the world, both live and joining us virtually, without any of the technical hitches today, I would say. So you can see just the real Global All-Stars list of people who shared their insights and perspective, from Gothenburg in Sweden, the world's most sustainable destination. Visit Iceland, that's really been at the forefront of reopening in terms of international visitation and how to balance health and the return of tourism. Singapore, a real standout in so many ways and a real leader around hybrid events. So some fascinating content from there, along with our very good friends in Miami and Anaheim. Okay, just a couple of questions in the final few minutes. So Dave, there was a question for you about when the survey was conducted.
Yes, I hit those while you were offline, Chris, for what it's worth. But just to repeat, it was in mid-July of this year.
Oh, very good. So you picked up on that. And just to finish my thought around international travelers. Obviously, with borders closed, did you have any sense from the research what percentage of those international travelers are substituting domestic vacations for international at the moment? And obviously, there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, that's a really hard thing to measure, but I would suspect that given the high travel propensity that they have and the high interest in travel, that much of that was replaced by domestic travel. I mean, I can't imagine any other scenario, Sorry, I don't have a better answer for you, Chris, but yeah.
Yeah, but that was really the key reason we wanted to highlight those insights on those international travelers, to really highlight the fact that 230 billion, I think it was, in 2019 was spent by Americans traveling abroad. There's obviously a great opportunity picking up on some of those passions and areas of interest to present domestic vacation spots, including national parks, to people who otherwise would have thought, oh, I'm going to go to Europe or Asia or wherever. And Donnie, there's a question here just finally in terms of collaboration between national parks and recreate responsibly. I don't know if you addressed that while I was otherwise engaged.
No, not yet. And I love the question. I want to give a shout out to the Recreate Responsibly Coalition. I mean, there is a coalition of nonprofits, outdoor providers, the gear companies and gear manufacturers, REI, federal agencies, state agencies, this coalition that actually has fairly formally risen up around this Recreate Responsibly message and been finding different ways to amplify that through lots of different channels. I know that places like Colorado, this Colorado State Agency was participating in that over this last year in the summer. Arizona has a formal relationship with Leave No Trace. I know other states are, very proactively leaning into it. So it is out there, and I encourage, folks to either reach out to me. I'd love to connect you to that coalition, and see how active they are near you or how you can participate and amplify. I think it's really wonderful that this coalition has sprung up kind of from the outdoor and recreation space. It really mirrors messages that we all want to get out there about sustainable travel and responsible travel. There's a lot of alignment and cohesion there. So yeah, just a few examples that I know of, but I encourage folks to research and look at this coalition that is formed up around Recreate Responsibly. I know they'd love to have, more destination organizations in there to amplify.
Yeah, and just another organization, Donnie, that we've been connected with Colorado Tourism Office. We worked with Leave No Trace, and the Colorado Tourism Office and their Care for Colorado initiative is a great initiative in terms of highlighting best practices for people not just in natural areas, but in fact visiting in general. How can they travel responsibly and minimize their impact on both the natural environment and communities? Okay, so let's wrap it up. Thanks so much, Donnie, and thanks to you, Dave, for sharing. We'll be updating the resources from today on that website. We look forward to connecting with you all at an upcoming webinar or in an event in person, and stay well, stay safe, and thanks again.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks. All right.
Okay, so sorry about that, Donnie. You were a pro, mate.
Yeah, he picked it up just fine, Chris. I think things went great. So
probably better. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not needed at all. That's what I was thinking.
My former days as a cruise director come in pretty handy. Just so you know, I spent some of my 20s actually up there leading cruises, which really sharpens your